everyone, and welcome back to another Dwarven Tavern video. This review is another Traveler review from Mongoose Publishing, and it is the Mercenary book. This is Mercenary book. It's book one, Mercenary, and it goes for $29.99, 1 penny shy of $30, as you might imagine. Yeah. In my opinion, no Traveler game would be complete without the option of, without the Mercenaries. And the Mercenary rulebook, when I started Traveler, way back in the early 80s with obviously an earlier edition, Traveler, and let's see, what was it? It was the core rule book, and then it was the Mercenary book, and it was the smaller, the smaller books that the Traveler had. And Mercenary was the coolest, one of the coolest series of flavors for the game, because just to give you an idea of what the Mercenary book is about, Book 1 Mercenary 2nd Edition is a guide to the gritty life of the hired gun. And for, fans of The Mandalorian out there, this is kind of along those lines. This is kind of that flavor. These specialized few are often more than just soldiers looking for some side money. They are frequently members of units of like-minded militants that devote their lives to pulling the trigger. It is a hard life to enjoy and a harder one to be successful at. That is true. Wherever there are spacefarers, there will be violence. Where there is violence, there is a need for mercenaries. And let's just go that one further, is wherever there are humans, wherever there's life, there's conflict. Life is war. Peace is death. That's just that's just how it really is. All life is struggle and conflict and battle. Every day is a struggle to survive, and 2020 has been very clear about that. So in the book, we start out with your career options, which is Air Force, Wet Navy, expanded events, medals and awards, and how to become a mercenary. And let's jump to that here on page 17. After a fruitful, varied, and interesting military career, most servicemen and women enter civilian life. However, there are many for whom the call of military life never really goes away, and that's very true. There are tons of service people who are pulled out of their lifestyle, their combat, and placed in a situation where there are no orders to follow, and you can't fight back the way they could, and it's very seriously traumatic. I mean, it's a serious condition. It's a serious problem in the real world. And not to be too serious about it, but in here it says unable to return to their previous military service, perhaps because of age, unfortunate events, or a desire to put some space between themselves and regular military discipline. Joining a mercenary unit can hold a great deal of appeal, which it does in real life. So if anything, what I'm saying is that this book, it provides a very accurate twist, a very accurate representation of what that could be like, if you're taken out of military situation where you're relatively successful and thrust into a civilian situation, which is in a completely different world. You may feel the call to become a merc. There's a movie with Jeremy Renner called the Hurt Locker, which is a really good demonstration of that particular condition of the human mind, where you come home and you're just lost. You just don't know what to do, and you're going over there. You have purpose, and it's a whole messed up ball of wax. And this book is actually a very good representation of that syndrome, that particular phenomenon, if you will. It covers things like better combat potential, armor-piercing, destructive weapons, blind fire, flechette rounds, forward observers, fusion weaponry, indirect fire, panic fire, and scaling battles, which is my favorite thing. It says here on page 21, Traveler operates on 2 different scales when it comes to combat. First, there is a personal level where characters battle one another. Vehicles also operate on this scale. Above this, there is the spacecraft level where ships carry enough weaponry to boil a tank in one blast. Note that a 3rd scale, mass battles, is introduced later in this book. I just totally love the mass battles. Because spacecraft scale weaponry is so lethal to ground forces, not often that a vehicle, much less characters, will ever want to take a stand against a ship. Which, yeah, of course. I don't want to fight. I don't want to fight that cruiser. I'll punch it. Then it covers the rules about personal versus spacecraft. If a destructive weapon targets a spacecraft, it loses its destructive trait, but its damage is treated as if it were a spacecraft scale weapon, which is on page 150 of the core rulebook. So, if a spacecraft weapon targets anything on the personal scale, be it a vehicle or a very unlucky character, it gains a destructive trait and rolls the damage normally, like vaporizing any character it strikes or seriously damaging even the most heavily armored vehicles. So it's simple rules that it's just like duh. I mean, it's simple rules that kind of sum up the spirit, the gist of the thing. Words, man, they're all over. This book also covers building a mercenary force, recruiting, the recruiting process, recruiting modifiers, government code, starports, miscellaneous, and how they affect the whole recruiting process. Very cool if you want to build your own force and you're not playing player characters, but you're like a single character, and you just want to build a military force, then you would use this book to do so. The rules are very straightforward, as always. I mean, there's a good reason that it's one of the best games out there. And I was really surprised at a couple of friends of Taverneer Ian had never heard of Traveler, and I'm like, what? What? How is that a thing? But yeah, we're getting them all indoctrinated into the Traveler universe. So it's complete. It allows you to really roll out a well-rounded mercenary force, right down to the recruit personalities, such as, where's my six-sided dice? Oh no, I've lost my six-sided dice. Well, I've got dice everywhere, so. It's not like I lost them, it's just that I used them for something else. That's going to bother me. So you can have criminal, dangerous, well-traveled, over-eager, well-trained, drunkards, mistrustful, so forth and so on. It's got a whole bunch of different personality traits. And it has the rules for units in Traveler. It's called units, and all units, regardless of size, are represented in the same way in Traveler with a unit roster. An example of a unit in this case is a squad of mercenary light infantry shown here. Let's see, the unit name is Rorschach's Razors. The organization is squad, type light infantry, size 12, morale 7, endurance 12, attack, damage +1, third D. Traits none, skills gun combat, slug 1, weapons assault rifle 3D -3, and armor is cloth tech level 10, like Kevlar. So that describes it's one of the coolest things about Traveler is they do the most amount of exposition in the least amount of space possible from what I've always seen. And it just allows for rapid game development, rapid fill in the blanks, as it were. And I like that. And then it has leaders and auxiliary position like administrator, cooks, doctors, drivers, combat medics, and so forth. Gives the rules for that. Let's see, vehicles and forces, combining different vehicle types, hiring on, and so forth. So the whole thing is geared toward, this whole section is geared toward having a complete unit of mercs at your disposal. So we are currently running a brand new Traveler game. When I began doing the reviews earlier, everybody was like, "Hey, let's do a game. Let's start a Traveler game." And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm kind of way ahead of you. I was wanting to do this, like 3 years ago." But the point is, we have a new Traveler game going, and it might, involve this. I know that Josh was wanting to do something a little bit different, and Ian was too. I mean, they all have their different ideas. They're all in the same unit, and they're all playing multiple characters. I think all of them, maybe not. But most of them are playing multiple characters that are geared toward different things. And the cool thing about Traveler is that if your character isn't involved, it's not like fantasy role playing or most other sci-fi role playing, where if you have a character that's not in this episode, they're just standing there like in an enchanted sleep or something. They're actually in the Frozen Watch, and you put them in a cryo chamber, a stasis chamber, or what have you, and they literally sit it out. So it's super easy to run any kind of game you want. The bad thing is, we were playing a game back in the 80s in which everybody in the group, and there was probably about 8 or 10 of us that played off and on in a rotating squad, just depending on who was available. And those who weren't playing was in the Frozen Watch. They were in cryo chambers, and when one of us, and I say us in the loosest terms because everybody was just about ready to beat him to death, one of the group decided that they were going to do something stupid and got the ship blown up. I mean, literally, it was destroyed. I mean, completely. And of course, the Frozen Watch, they were all dead. So that is a thing that it can happen. It was a terrible story, and I'll probably tell it one day. But I don't know why he did that. Nobody actually can understand his logic unless he was either a complete and total douchebag or just a complete and total idiot. Both of those options were bad, and for him to be behind the wheel, whew, man. Okay, so here on page 50, it begins with battles and wars, fighting in mass combat. Battles using the mass combat system on page 50 use exactly the same rules presented for the Combat and the Traveler Core rulebook, with just a few changes. These changes are listed below, but whenever in doubt, the golden rule is always to assume that the standard combat rules from the Traveler Core rulebook are used as normal. This will allow you to use rules from any Traveler book with no conversion or adaptation necessary at all. Initiative. In mass combat, dexterity is not a factor for determining initiative. Each unit must instead make a tactics check with intelligence used as a modifier. This is made by the leader of the unit. The combat round. Mass combat usually lasts for 6 seconds of game time, just as it does when it involves characters. This is increased to a minute if units of greater than size 1,000 are present, and an hour if it's greater than 10,000 per unit. So, as you might imagine, this could get into some pretty big freaking battles, which I adore that. I love that. I love war games. War games, yeah. I recently saw a picture of Peter Cushing dressed as a pirate playing with little miniature Grand Moff Tarkin himself playing with miniatures and boats, because he was a huge Mini fan. And I don't mean a tiny little thing that blows cold air. I mean, he was a miniature freaking maniac. He had thousands and thousands and thousands of miniature figures and played war games. So, minor actions are taken into account, significant actions, miscellaneous actions, reactions, and attacks, unit size, and damage. As a unit takes casualties, there will be less personnel in the unit to attack the enemy. No kidding. This will have an effect on the damage the unit deals, of course. When casualties are sustained, compare the units on the unit size on a table below to find out its new damage modifier. It goes if it's 20,000 people or more. That's amazing. That's an amazing thought. The damage modifier is times 10. If it's 10 or less, the damage modifier is minus 5. So, and again, it's 10, 11 to 20, 21 to 50, 51 to 100, so forth, all the way up to 20,000 or more. Morale. Even the most disciplined, battle-hardened troops have their limits, and it gives the rules for morale checks, which is sensible. Recovering casualties, because not everybody that falls in battle is dead. You've got the wounded and so forth. It has the rules for vehicles within mass combat, which is very thorough. Characters within mass combat. Now, this is a big deal, because one of the hardest things it is to referee or dungeon master for a character in the midst of battle. So generally speaking, here on page 53, the player's own character should be kept apart from mass combat. Have the players make the rolls for the units under their command by all means, but their actual characters should have a chance to perform heroics and necessary tasks beyond the skills and daring of the men and women they are leading. So yeah, I agree with that. I haven't found many rules at all that I disagree with in Traveler, except for I think the 6 minutes for combat round in space. It sounds a bit long, like the guns are kind of slow to fire, but if you got to do the tracking and the fire resolution and all that stuff with it, I guess, and I think also we're all used to the stylized space combat, and well, it has to be stylized because there's no real space combat, but the stylized combat in the movies and such, it might take longer than 6 minutes between turns. So I don't know. It is a weird thing. And there's a couple of little funky little things about, like if you've gotten multiple types of guns on a single turret, you can only fire one type of them at a time, stuff like that I don't necessarily agree with, but that rule 0 comes into play. And if you want to be able to fire a pulse laser on the same turret with a beam laser, then you can certainly do that if you are the referee. Engaging units. Individual characters may not engage units as such, but will instead attack the individual members of the unit. This is done using the normal combat rules. Every casualty caused an attack will reduce the unit's endurance by 1. Good rule. And so forth. So you've got battlefields, map-based and freeform, the differences therein, and how they come into play. Then you have battlefield events, just as a single 2-die table, such as something shakes the confidence of a random unit, an immediate morale check must be taken. So maybe they saw something or somebody said something and it freaked them out. Or maybe the commander of a random unit finds himself in his element for the rest of the battle. He gains a die modifier of +1 to all leadership checks, like the smell of napalm in the morning. It smells like victory, I've heard. So then it has the rules for strongholds and sieges, and it's the stronghold storage type, amount of weapons, sensors, layout, occupants. Then it has, beginning on page 60, it's got a number of stronghold types, like the bunker, the redoubt, the strong point, the tower, the weapon battery. Then it has environmental modifications like armor, defensive modifications, anti-missile systems, decoy systems, and so forth. It's very thorough. It has a whole list of things like Gatling lasers, heavy autocannons, medium mortars, and so forth. So it's got ton of weapons that you can mount on your stronghold. Ready-made fortresses, it's got a number of those. Then it's got some ground vehicles. The graphics are kind of weird. I'm not really a huge fan of the graphics, but it does show them. Like here on page 90, it's got the New Point Grav APC with a VRF cause gun. The Crusader self-propelled gun, etc., Paladin, Grav tank, and so forth. You got a pretty good selection of ground vehicles that go in, in addition to the vehicle handbook. But these are all weapons and vehicles and equipment that is befitting a hired mercenary crew, which I love the flavor. And then, of course, it has just a bleeding buttload, and that's a lot of, in Appendix 1, shooting weapons, which it's like this. It's a almost like a centerfold. I guess for some people it could be. 800 millimeter siege guns, for God's sake. Assault submachine gun. The cartridge laser rifle. The fusion rifle. Gauss support weapons, etc., etc., etc. It's got, oh my God, it has, I never really paid attention to how many weapons were in this, but it is from page 110 all the way to the end, it looks like, of page 128. So it's got 18 pages of weapon statistics, and then it also has, Appendix 2 is a list of pre-rolled soldiers, officers, and specialists. And then it has, in Appendix 3 is a standard light infantry with what they have and, their equipment and everything. I've seen quite a few character generators online that there is one, and I can't think of the name of it, but I'll put it on the description below, because it's an incredibly cool and very useful tool for rolling up to 1,000,001 NPCs, like just 1,000,001. You say generate that, again, it generates it into a text file, so you've got it, and then you can use those characters for whatever. But it doesn't really do equipment, and this has, I mean, it doesn't have a lot. It's like 15 total different standard light infantry types, right? But it has their equipment stuff. For a quick game, you can equip. It's just a quick reference guide for tech level 0 to 2, all the way up to tech level 15, with the plasma and fusion gunman portables and battle dress and etc. Freaking awesome. And it's just right there for you to use, to have, and to hold. Well, to marry it. For it being, it's 131 pages of pure gold, giving it an official 5 axes. Yeah. I was going to subtract a half an axe for the weird graphics, but just as an example, they're like, it's almost like it's not completely rendered computer graphics, or they're very, very old computer graphics. This book was only made 6 years ago, so it should have better graphics in it than that. So I don't know, it's weird, but the content makes up for it, and so I'm taking off a half an axe. I'm still giving it 5 axes, but it gets a serious deduction for the crappy graphics. But it doesn't detract from the book overall, because to me, it's more than the pictures. Even though the pictures are very, it helps to immerse the reader and the players into the game. So I would say that this is a must. This is an absolute must-have for any Traveler game, if you're serious about it. But if you want to have the most fun possible, this is the book for you. It is Traveler Mercenary from Mongoose Publishing. Check them out. Tell them I sent you. They might let you buy a copy. It's $29.99 or less, depending on where you shop. And there you have it. So, on that happy note, it's a good book. I am Dr. Jeff Goins, and on behalf of the entire cast and crew of the Dwarven Tavern, wishing for you to want for nothing but adventure. And at first I feared it, then I charged. Thank you for watching and putting up with me, and I will see you next time. Let the